All right, so I have this question here that I got from a person that commented on my channel, and let me make it this bigger so you can see it more easily. It said, "Do you ever think about why there are so many different companies, in quotes, advertising tax relief on radio commercials?" Do I ever think about that? No, the answer is no. I don't really think about that, but I did think about it a little bit more when I was doing Uber and Lyft as a profession. And then the question continues. They say they can help people even if those people have years of unfiled tax returns. Well, he didn't say tax returns, but I threw that in there. Now, how does someone go in years without filing and not have the IRS bother them? I felt this was a very interesting question, so I figured I'd make a video about it. I have a few points here that I've jot down on this little piece of paper that you can't see because of the background blocker that I have. Anyway, do I ever think about this? No, I don't really ever think about this, but there is a three-part question that I can kind of make this into because there's a lot of different aspects of this question that he asked. One of which is why is there so many companies? Why are there so many of these companies that exist? And my guess is that people always kind of want like a little money secret, like there's a little secret thing that you can do that we know, and if you just give us your money, I can help you figure that out. So when it comes down to anything, whether it be investing, credit score, or tax related, there's always a little hack or secret that no one knows about but me. And if you just pay me your money, I can help you solve that problem. That's a big part of it. I mean, some of it might be actually that some of these companies might actually be able to help somebody in certain circumstances. But I think the big part is just that people really have this need to solve a financial problem, or really a lot of their problems, try to solve their financial problems the easiest way possible, even if that means they're probably going to fall into scams all along the way. Because usually the easy way is usually too good to be true, and it's too good to be true because it actually is too good to be true. And also, a lot of the times, these companies do things that you could, with just a little bit of just a small amount of research, you could probably do on your own. But that's not to say that none of these companies offer anything beneficial to people. Some of these companies probably do, but a lot of them are probably going to cost you more than uh, what what is really required. Now, another aspect of this question is, can they? Let me see here. Can they actually help even if you have many years of unfiled tax returns? Yes, they some of these people probably can help if you have years of fun non tax. I don't know specifically what company you're talking about on the radio, but I would be very skeptical of the company regardless. But one of the thing is that a lot of the times, if you just file the tax returns that you have due, then you will end up not owing taxes that, or at least not as much taxes as you thought you would have otherwise owed, because the IRS would typically send you a letter saying that you owe, $20,000, whatever the case may be, just because they file your tax return in such a way that doesn't include any deductions, any credits. If you have children that you would have included in your tax return normally, they won't include that. They just make it as if you have a business or 1099 that comes in from a business source, or like a self-employment income type of endeavor, they won't include any expenses in there. So a lot of the times people will find themselves in a bind because a lot of employers, especially lately, have been classifying what are effectively their employees as 1099 uh, people, and they're not been telling them the tax implications of that. So they feel like they're getting paid more, but a lot of the times after they file their tax returns, they're not actually getting paid more, or they file their tax returns and for several years in a row they'll commit tax fraud, and then eventually the IRS will, audit their tax returns, and then they'll go back on several years of tax returns and realize, hey, well, you've been committing tax fraud for the last 5 years. But that's also I mean, if them you getting audited in general, however, is very unlikely. A lot of the times, it's just that the IRS will see that you haven't filed a tax return, and they will make your tax. They will file your tax return for you in a sense. They will see how much they think that you will owe, and then they will send you a letter saying this is how much you owe us. And if you actually just file your tax returns for the last 10, 5, whatever years, a lot of the times you won't owe the tax as much as they said that you owe. And then also sometimes the penalties and interest that accumulate due to not filing a tax return and due to owing money, both two different penalties that you have to pay. And then on top of that, the interest that accumulated on that money that they assumed in their calculation of how much you would owe, a lot of times that would disappear or at least decrease as a result of you um, filing your tax return, because a lot of those penalties and interests are a percentage base of how much you actually pay in taxes, or how much you actually owe in taxes, which is the reason why I guess you could theoretically pay penalties for filing your tax return late if you get a refund. But if you're due a refund, almost never do the IRS send you a letter saying you file your tax return late, you were due a refund, but we're going to charge you a penalty anyway. Um, has that ever happened? I've never heard of it happening. I've never seen it happen. I haven't really talked about anyone having seen that, but I guess that is theoretically possible. If you're filing late, you would have to pay a penalty theoretically, but it's based off how much you owe, the percentage. And if you don't owe anything, it's very hard for them to, how are they going to calculate that? I don't know. So usually if you go years and years without filing a tax return, but the IRS, well, we'll get to that in a second, because there's the second question that's going into the third question that we have here from this comment that we have. Another aspect of this here is, yeah, well, I already said that. So yeah, that's the main thing. So the third question that we might have out of this comment is, how can someone go so many years without filing a tax return? Well, there's a few different reasons, and I have a huge list of them here because there's a lot of different possibilities why. But first off, let's just get off right at the back that, like I just said before, if the IRS calculates that you don't owe money, and that you actually are receiving a refund, they're not going to be in a rush to tell you that you owe that money or that they owe you money. It's kind of like, for example, let's say, for example, you owe money to somebody, and after 3 years, you don't have to pay them back. And if they forget to send you a bill, then you don't have to worry about sending them back. As soon as they send you a bill, you have to make sure you pay them. It's a guarantee. You have to pay them. But as long as they never send you that bill, you're not at all legally obligated to pay them. That's kind of how it is from the IRS's perspective. As long as they have your money in their hands and you have not filed a tax return, that is their money. And if you wait 3 years, typically, the pandemic kind of made it a little bit more complicated. But generally speaking, you have 3 years to file that tax return. And if you don't file that tax return on time, you will not be eligible to get that money under most circumstances. There are almost always exceptions in the tax law. When there's a rule, you can almost always find an exception to the rule, which is one of the reasons why, for example, these tax companies exist, is because generally speaking, if you owe penalties and taxes, the IRS is not going to abate them or get rid of them. However, there are circumstances where the IRS will lower the penalties and interests that you have to pay on the money that you owe over the last 10 years of not filing a tax return, 5 years, whatever the case may be. Also, there's the possibility that the IRS might just lower the total amount that you owe under circumstances as well. For example, one example that comes off the top of my mind is that if paying that money would cause you substantial financial hardship, there are circumstances where they might allow you to pay less than the amount that you have owe. But generally speaking, if you owe money, the IRS is going to want you to pay it. It's just that simple. Like you can call these companies hoping that they can create a miracle for you, but most of the time the IRS is going to want you to pay your tax returns. And a lot of the times, in fact, if you just haven't filed a tax return, that's the reason why a lot of these people end up getting a check in the mail for like $20,000 from the IRS, is that they either erroneously filed a tax return, meaning they made a big mistake on the tax return that needs to be fixed, or their tax professional made a big mistake. That's also a possibility. Or they just haven't filed their tax return, which is a big cause. Another thing here is that, yeah, I already said that. So, no, I didn't say this part. Yeah, many people won't file a tax return if they won't get a big refund or they are going to owe. What I find a lot of the times, if once someone realizes they are not getting a big refund or that they're going to owe, they just say, you know what, they just throw their hand up and say, all right, well, I'll go somewhere else and file my tax return. And then they never end up going somewhere else and file their tax return. And then they end up owing that money that they end up owing, or if they didn't owe any money, they just had a little small refund, they continue that practice of just not filing a tax return the next year and then the next year. And then one of these years they might end up owing, because if you only get a small refund one year, the next year, especially if you start earning more money, you might end up owing. So for me, a lot of the times it just comes down to people thinking that somehow not filing a tax return is better than filing a tax return and just not paying the money. That's a big mistake that a lot of people don't realize. Is the IRS is not like a lot of people get this idea that if you don't file a tax return, the IRS won't know how much money you have. Like if you, unless you're just using the barter system, you're just, I don't know, trading. Your plumber comes to your house and I don't know, you give him some service. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that. I was gonna go a different direction with that. But anyway, you give him a service in return, a legal one, that, or if you're like, I don't know, using only cash, you're only using cash, then that's the only circumstances that could probably exist where the IRS might not know what is going on. But if you're using electronic systems, credit cards, debit cards, um, if you're receiving checks in the mail, or if your company is giving you checks, you're receiving W-2s, 1099s, etc. The IRS already knows how much money you made. They literally, how they know whether or not you're cheating on your tax return is that they have a, well, there's more of a computer system, but they have a system of calculating how much they think you owe and how much they think you should owe. And then they also have some type of algorithm that detects probably what is the probability of this person being cheating on their tax returns. And then from there, that system goes into IRS agent, and then they'll do further looking if they get selected for a further inquiry type audit situation. So yeah, a lot of the times it's just, even if you owe money and even if you can't afford to pay this, any smart tax professional will tell you, even if you cannot afford to pay the money that you owe to the IRS, you still should just go ahead and file your tax return. It's just that simple. And then also, even if you file your tax return and then you want to go back and amend it because you think you made a mistake and you think the original tax return amount that you were owing was too much, you made this stupid mistake, and then you talk to a tax professional who's knowledgeable and they say, well, you can do this or that, you can amend the tax return. This is another thing that some of these companies might end up doing. Sometimes they might go back and look at your previous year tax returns and see that, oh, well, you made this mistake, and you can do these changes in order to actually better your tax situation. I'm guessing that's might be something that they do. I don't work for any of these companies, so I don't really, somewhat outside of my circle of competence, what these companies actually do. But I would imagine that most things that you hear, most businesses that most marketing material is better than the actual product. So whenever you hear anything in a on the, being advertised, it's almost always the best possible version of that. It's kind of like going on a first date. They're always going to show you their best side. It's not until you get married, have 3 kids, until you realize that this person is a crazy person that, I don't know, does crazy things. And a lot of companies are like this as well. A lot of these, and whenever it comes down to money, you can't really trust people. Honestly, I don't care if it's your mom, your uncle, your brother. When it comes down to money, especially a stranger offering you help, whenever someone's offering you help in the financial realm, you got to watch out, because they're not doing it for their own good heartedness. Most likely, there's a rare exceptions. If you run into Mr. Beast, maybe, but even him, he's doing it in exchange for something, which is YouTube views and money and fame and the benefits that come with that. That doesn't mean he's not doing a good thing for someone else. Doesn't mean some of these companies aren't doing good things for people, but a lot of the times it comes at an unreasonable price. Let's see here. At the IRS, oh yeah, the IRS, this is another one I have here. A lot of people just don't file a tax return unless there's someone constantly putting pressure on them. So a lot of the times people will go 5, 6, 7 years without filing a tax return just because they don't file a tax return, nothing happens. So then they just keep not filing a tax return. They just make a habit out of it. Or it's just, they're complicated. Tax season for a lot of people is very stressful. As someone who deals with hundreds of people every tax season, it's like you can see that some people are just so anxious. A lot of people are really scared that the IRS will kick in their door and take them away, take away their family, take away their money, come in their house, strip their freaking wardrobe, and just take all their things away and sell it on eBay or something like that. Like a lot of people are terrified of the IRS, which whenever the people are terrified of a wing of the government or any part of the government or the government itself, that's probably a problem. But at the same time, they're not scared enough, or at least because they're obviously not doing the things that they want them to do, which is file the tax return. But some people get so anxious about it that they just don't want to file the tax return. They just don't want to deal with it, so they just ignore it. And that's avoidance, which is very common in human psychology, just avoiding things that we don't like. Um, let's see here. And the IRS is, oh yeah, the IRS is busy. I mean, the IRS, you don't understand how many people there are in the United States. The United States is a massive country. There's like hundreds of millions of us. And I mean, even people who you don't think have a tax return might have a tax return or some tax documents in their name. Like if there's like I don't know, a 5-year-old um, who was a father or mother or grandmother gave them like a little I bond or something like that, they still are going to have to, the IRS still kind of has to deal with those documents that are associated with that. If that bond is in that child's name, that child, there's going to be information sent to the IRS about that child, about that investment information or investment that they have in their name, that investment account, that investment, etc., in their name. That's going to sit to the IRS. They might not have to be required to file a tax return. Not everyone who receives money in a year are required to file a tax return. That's another aspect of it. So it complicates things from the IRS perspective that they have so many people to deal with, and some people are legit allowed to not file a tax return. So how do you know if someone's legit and not? We're not allowed. Not allowed is not the right word, but legit is not required to. Let me rephrase that. They're not legit, not required to file a tax return. How do you know that? Well, they have to kind of first they have to use their computer system, and then they also have to use their agent to do that. Well, the agents, they're not, and have an abundance of money and funding as some people might think. So a lot of the times it comes down to they have to be somewhat selective about who they check and who they don't check. And then once they run into someone who's a repeat offender and this person owes a bunch of money, well, then they're obviously going to go after that person rather than the person who should have filed but never filed for the last 5 years. But the last 5 years, they would have gotten a refund in based off the IRS calculation. So they kind of have to pick and choose who they go after, and because they have a limited amount of resources. I'm sure if they had an unlimited amount of resources, they would go after people every single year. Which this gets into the next aspect of this, which is a lot of people will hear from a friend or a family member that they have gone years without they've gone years without filing a tax return and nothing has happened to them. So a lot of the times, I don't know, it's amazing how people's brains work. They think, well, because I've gotten away with something that's illegal in the past, or someone I know has gotten away with doing something illegal in the past, let me just keep doing it. Well, there's there are people who have committed plenty of crimes or done plenty of things that are illegal and have gotten away with it for many, many years. They just kept doing it and kept doing it. Bank robbers, freaking drug dealers, all types of people doing all types of things. They've gotten away with it for years, and then one day the law catches up to them. Well, it's the same thing with not filing your tax return for 20 years. Eventually, it might come up to you. And if you ever do want to file a tax return, there's a chance that you might not even get the money due to the fact that you have all these previous years of unfiled tax returns. And that's another thing that leads people to not want to file their tax return, is just that they know that they haven't filed a tax return for the last 20 years. So they're worried they're not going to actually get their refund, or the last time they filed their tax return, they didn't get a refund. So they just stopped doing it in the future. There's a lot of different reasons why people don't file their tax returns. But a lot of the times when they get bad tax advice from their friends, like if anyone who's in the tax profession for long enough has heard someone say, unless they're just dealing with people who are higher end, wealthier clients, this is probably not something they're going to hear. But if you run into lower income clients, especially those in the Black community, you will probably run into someone who says, well, I haven't filed a tax return in years and nothing happened to me. Well, that's just because the IRS is taking their time with you. And a lot of the times, what benefit do they have of rushing you to do your tax return? If you don't do your tax return and you owe money, that means they just build interest. They build penalties and interest over the time of each tax return you don't do. So then when they actually send you a bill, they have all of this extra money that they can get from you. It just, from a financial perspective, it makes no sense for them to rush you to file a tax return. Either they get to keep your refund, or they get to charge you more money, penalties and interest. And the penalties can be like up to 25% of whatever you owe. So that means that's like a 25%. That could be a pretty quick 25% return on that money that they owe you. Why are they going to rush? Why are they going to rush to get you to pay your tax return, pay your taxes, and do your tax return? It's much in their benefit for you to pay it eventually, but then do it in a delayed fashion because they get more money that way. I don't know if they would agree with me on that, but from a financial perspective, it's hard to deny. And let's see what else do we have here. Yeah, so yeah, but that's a big one. Just like don't listen to your friend's bad tax advice because a lot of the times that's where that comes from. People will hear from a family member, a relative that they, and a lot of the times what they don't realize is that their family member is in a different financial situation. There's plenty of family members that I know that I have who are not required to file a tax return, don't need to file a tax return, and doing so doesn't really benefit them that much. So for me, if I were to just listen to, oh, well, they haven't filed a tax return in forever, so let me do what they did. That their tax situation is different than mine. So a lot of the times, if you hear someone else saying that they didn't file a tax return in so many years and nothing happened to them, that might just be because their tax situation is different than yours, and that's the reason why the IRS hasn't gone after them, but they may very well go after you, and they're not going to be in a rush to do it because they have millions of people who are not filing tax returns that they should have filed. Millions. So how do they decide? Well, they have to take their time and go through millions. I think a lot of people have a hard time with scale. And like it's easy to understand that I've done something wrong. So maybe why haven't they come after me? Well, it must be something that I can get away with. Well, yeah, because they have millions of people to go through. They might come to you eventually, but they might have 100 million people who haven't filed a tax return over the last, or let me rephrase that. They have 100 million tax returns that have not been filed yet, that should have been filed. It might, over the course of the last 10, 20 years, they might have. So for me, it's not just, and you have to think about it, it's just not just individual tax returns. You have to deal with business tax returns, C corporations, S corporations, LLCs tax as C corporations, LLCs taxes S corporations, LLCs taxes partnerships, partnership returns that are not LLCs, all different types of taxing entities that they have to deal with. Foreign corporation. The IRS is, the types of things that they have to deal with are massive. There's plenty of tax returns that should be coming their way, and they have to sift through these and figure out who's not filing tax return. And I think that's probably a big reason why they delay. A less cynical view of why they might delay in actually reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, you need to file this tax return." Let's see here, and oh yeah, and this kind of goes on with the last one. The last kind of reason why people go years without filing a tax return, the IRS doesn't bother them, is that a lot of the times some people just receive bad tax advice from a lot of the times from family members, friends, co-workers, TikTokers. Like they'll file a tax return, they'll fill out their W-4 form, which is like the withholdings form, and they'll just have no tax being withheld for the last 5 years. They go do a tax return, they're owing a bunch of money that they should have paid throughout the year because they thought they were doing this infinite money glitch, and then that year they don't get any money, so they don't file that tax return. And then the next year they don't file that tax return either, and then they don't refill out the W-4 form, so they keep owing every single year, and they just keep not filing a tax return because they keep owing every year. And then they eventually, after 5 or 6 years, they have a big tax bill, and then they don't want to file. So then they go to one of these companies, and these companies offer them the world. And a lot of the times they can't do that. A lot of the times the best thing that they can do is file their tax return and hope to reduce it somewhat based off that. Maybe try to get an abatement for some of the penalties and interest that they have accumulated over that time period. But that's the best that they can hope for. Really, a lot of the times it's just maybe they will abate some of these penalties and interest, if not lower some of the amount they owe from actually filing the tax returns. But yeah, the W-4 thing is a big one. When people try to withhold less money throughout the year, and then they end up owing, and then they're surprised that they end up owing, like they just thought that somehow they were just going to still get money. Because a lot of times people are confused about what tax refunds are. A lot of times you get the people who know nothing, who think the government is just giving them money. You get people who know slightly more than nothing, but close to nothing, where they think that the money is just the government giving you your money back. And the truth is actually in between those two things. Sometimes your tax refund is just the government giving you money. It's just straight up. A lot of the times people don't realize that. A lot of the times, sometimes in a tax refund, it might be some of your actual money on top of the government giving you money, or just the government giving you money if you didn't have anything withheld. On the other side, sometimes people are just getting their own money back. So either way, it confuses people what that is. But a lot of the times, people don't realize that for the most part, your refund is composed of you getting more of your own money back, and so they think the government is just magically producing money and putting it in their pocket, and they start to do things like not withhold money throughout the year and then still expect the government to give them money, which is a lot of the time not the case. It is the case sometimes, but a lot of the times it's not the case. So anyway, so that's basically the main reasons why people would just not file tax returns. And this is the reason why these companies exist, because a lot of the times people just do straight up stupid things, get themselves in stupid situations, and then they're looking for an easy way out. Well, you spend 10, 7, 8 years digging yourself into the hole. It might take about 6 or 7 years digging yourself out the hole. These companies offer promises that sometimes I don't think they can deliver on. And anytime you hear a radio advertisement about anything money related, you should be very, 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 very skeptical. And I didn't even say enough varies there. I could have added about 20 more and it still would have been an understatement. But anyway, goodbye.